those who have decided to come and listen to us, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I would like to thank the Kerala Literature Festival and its organizers for inviting us. The speakers have been introduced, and I will just say that it's a real pleasure to be here with them. Unfortunately, we don't have Dimitris Soublaikas, the artist from Greece who couldn't travel, unfortunately, but we still have these three distinguished speakers, two from Greece, one from Switzerland. And this is somewhat symbolic because we're going to talk about the financial crisis of 2008. Many people here, as I can see, are too young to remember that. But it was an event, global event. It was an event which affected Europe very deeply. And we're going to look at how it impacted the arts. Now, there could be two ways of discussing this topic. We could talk about how the financial crisis and its effect was expressed in the arts as a theme. And yesterday, I went to a session by the Irish writer Paul Lynch, and he said something interesting. He referred to, or he distinguished between sympathy and empathy. And he said that sympathy is what is generated by the news. We read the news, we feel somehow connected to what's happening, but we don't feel this very deep engagement with the people who are impacted by what we're reading about. And this is a feeling that he referred to as empathy, and that's generated by fiction. So if we think about that, there have been many works that have dealt with the crisis. There have been films, and that's not what we're going to be talking about. So, because that would be another session. We want to discuss really how artists could potentially respond to events like this. And why we're talking about this so late is after the event, is that we've had since then several other minor crises. I have to say this huge crisis was the biggest since that's how it has been described, the biggest since the Great Depression of 1929. What happened essentially was, in a very brief summary, that, we say that money is something that has become, it makes the world turn round, that's one thing, and it has become increasingly abstract. We don't really see the money that we're dealing with. And if we get a financial crisis like the one that happened, we actually realize that money is even more abstract than we thought. One day it's there on our computer screen in a bank. The next day it isn't. Now, the crisis created a situation, especially in several countries, and Greece was one of them, where people suffered greatly. They lost their property, they lost their savings, they lost their pensions. How did it happen? It happened, and this is a great oversimplification, but it happened because of deregulation of the financial services, and at the same time, because of behavior of people who were not held accountable for what they were doing. So it was a combination where bankers and stockbrokers were basically playing fast and loose with other people's money. And eventually, when everything came crashing down, they weren't held responsible. There were apparently only about 45 people who were jailed, who were taken to justice, and half of them were in Iceland, the tiny country which completely imploded in the crisis. Anyway, Greece was one of the countries that really suffered, as I said, and at the same time, because the government had to borrow a lot of money, it nearly crashed out of the European Union, and as a result, very severe austerity measures were imposed. So what I'd like to do is ask our writers to actually tell us about their own experience of this situation. And of course, Greece was where the money was lost, and Switzerland was where the money was hidden in Swiss banks. So we have this, big difference between the two countries. Now, if you could tell us, Katerina and Amanda, about your own experience and experience of how you experienced the environment around you when this happened, and also what was the impact on publishing, because publishing suffered quite a lot, like other businesses. So, Katerina, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much for being here, participate in this very interesting discussion. We have to go a few years back, but as Alexandra said, this crisis never really ended because we are living in a state of crisis, not only in Greece, but in the whole of Europe. It's a state of constant crisis because after the financial crisis, we had the crisis of COVID, and now we have another crisis following that. So what I want to say personally is that my generation, people who were in the 30s and 40s in 2008 when the crisis began, we realized, I think, for the first time that we are historical beings. So history happened to our lives because our generation, all over Europe, we grew up in the 90s. It was a time where there was a lot of development and there was relatively peace in the world, in Europe. And with this realization of we are subjects of history and no one is spared from this, came a realization of the broader spectrum of the world in which we belong and the dynamics of this world. And also through this, I mean, there's nothing positive about the crisis, so I cannot say anything good that came out of it, but within thought and language, we saw a few years later some ideas developing, coming up, books being written on the concepts of resilience, solidarity, care, and these concepts really holded us when we were in this state of crisis, because we had to watch our closest people and ourselves lose our jobs, lose our status, lose our stability in life, really collapse. And there is, even if you are not destroyed, you are depressed. So I will give now this to Amanda, and then we can maybe talk more about what happened to the arts. I wanted to start with this more personal feeling. And one more thing, like one last thing that has to do with this realization that you are a historical object also came in, and this is something very serious that if you are a privileged person, or if you live in a country that you have many privileges, you shouldn't ever think that you're entitled to these privileges. And the moment you start thinking that you are entitled to these privileges, which is exactly what's happening in Europe now, then you are heading towards fascism. I'm very sorry to say that this is happening in many countries in Europe at the moment.
Thank you so much I'm very glad to be a part of this panel, although I would prefer to be a part of a panel who would talk about Greece out of the crisis. I hope this would come one day. But it's a part of our social identity, political identity, to be in crisis in Greece, for, as you both said, for many years now, since 2008. I'm not a politician, but I am a political being, as every writer has their own politics and ethics. And in this sense, I will speak today. My personal experience was this of dichotomy, because it so happened that during the crisis, I lived in Berlin. So in 2008, in our Berlin apartment, when I had the privilege to have the DEAD grant, as we're speaking of privileges, I learned from the television, an old-fashioned way, not even from the computer, that the crisis official started. And what happened afterwards is that the years that followed, I continued to live as a Greek person in Germany and as a Germanized person in Greece when I came back for my holidays. This was a very, very strange psychological situation, because I had to talk like an ambassador of Greece to my German friends, who, even the most sensitive of them, asked questions like, why don't you pay your taxes? Like we are all a bunch of, I don't know, this cliche that Greeks are like that, Germans are like that. And then when I went back for my holidays in August, infuriated Greeks, why don't you come back? Why are you there with these terrible people? So, of course, this for a writer is food for thought and food for writing also. Because you have to have the point of view of the other. It doesn't matter how cruel this could be, but you have to get accustomed to be the other, to feel for the other. So I wasn't protected being in Berlin. I felt even more vulnerable. And the decision we took as a family, my partner, my daughter, and me, to go back to Greece in 2011 was a very political decision, because we thought that we cannot write or make art about Greece or what it means to be Greek if we're not there, if this comes from a television set or from the computer. And we decided to go back, although we didn't have a job anymore, because I had a job as a journalist in a very prestigious newspaper. And in the beginning of the crisis, I lost my job. So we came back, and we had two years of very, very serious financial problems, until somehow we found our first creative writing jobs, etc. I say that because sometimes I hear that Greeks who lived abroad didn't know what really happened to Greece. And I don't believe that. I believe that distance creates even a deeper emotional need to understand and yes, somehow probably also to go back in the middle of the crisis.
Yeah, you mentioned this question, why don't you pay your taxes? And I remember that the response to the Greek, specifically the Greek crisis, because there were other countries that needed to be bailed out. It was Ireland, it was Portugal and Cyprus. and the measures, the conditions of the bailout were very, very strict, very severe, very harsh. And the kind of sense of, they deserve it was, they brought it upon themselves was quite widespread. They don't pay taxes, they retire at 40 and so on. So I remember this very clearly, and I was defending Greece as well. But it was an interesting response because, you kind of have this, it happens with other cases when, I don't know, women are told they bring things upon themselves and so on, but they are in fact victims. So yeah. Christian, you're a very prolific writer. You are a journalist, you are a novelist, and you really started as journalist. You have lived in this country as a correspondent of the famous Der Spiegel, and you have been writing for various publications and newspapers. So you have this dual, Amanda, you are also a journalist apart from being a novelist, but Christian, so you have this dual viewpoint of someone who should be describing things basically from a kind of objective point of view, and then a completely different approach as a novelist.
No, thank you very much for asking me to be on this panel. And it's interesting that you said I was a journalist, because I fear I was the worst journalist that ever lived, because I had no objectivity. At the same time, during this, I have the feeling that we're moving from crisis to crisis to crisis, and I've been hearing, that the crisis has been going on for 40 years now, and it seems to be. Well, having said that, personally, I lived in Argentina during this time, which was also a country racked by corruption and mismanagement and greed, and President Cristina Fernandez Kirchner I think she had 400 apartments in Buenos Aires at the time. And, well, I think while I'm very not knowledgeable about the Greek financial crisis of 2008, I thought I'd prepare a short text that I think it's better for me to read from my notes. I think it speaks to this crisis mania that we're going through. We're living in a culture of fear. Fear has become an environment, an everyday landscape. There was a time when wars, famines, and epidemics were localized and limited by a certain time frame. Today it is the world itself that is limited, saturated, and manipulated. The world itself that seizes us and confines us with a stressful claustrophobia. Stock market crisis, undifferentiated terrorism crisis, lightning pandemics, trench warfare. Fear has become the world we live in. And this culture of fear, of manufactured permanent crisis, also means that states are tempted to create policies for the orchestration and management of fear. Neoliberalism, kleptocracy, and oligarchy has progressively eaten away at the traditional prerogatives of states, most notably of the welfare state. And the economic, in my view, the economic catastrophe of 2008 was not the death knell of capitalism, as some have claimed, but just further evidence that capitalism has accelerated into turbo-capitalism and is accelerating still. With every natural disaster, health scare, and malicious rumor now comes the inevitable information. Yeah, live feeds take over real space, and technology connects life to the immediacy of terror, the ultimate expression of speed. And in my view, the real harm of information is that it has, let's say, information, is that it has displaced a more essential practice of human life, and I think this is what you were talking about, narration. Unfortunately, corporations hire writers for data storytelling, cognitive behavioral therapists, and self-help gurus invite patients to investigate the stories they tell themselves. News media and elected officials construct political narratives to keep supporters in their orbit within the permanent crisis. These are narratives in name only. They don't have the world-making power of myth or say, religious ritual. True narration unites things and events, even trifling, insignificant, or incidental things into a story. In other words, it infuses the world around us with meaning. But we don't live in that kind of world, unfortunately. We live in a world where disjointed, inhuman information saturates social media platforms, smart devices, and news media. In contrast to narrative, which enters into human experience, our information is unavailable, disenchanting, fragmenting, and mechanical. For instance, though platforms like Instagram brand their content as stories, they contain only information adorned with images, information that is briefly registered and then disappears. Thank you for bearing with me. I had to write this down beforehand. I can't really speak that well freely, but thank you for this, allowing me to rant a little bit.
Oh, thank you, Christian. And what you say about social media and also the whole question of instilling fear in us. And I think that's where you can manipulate people. When they're afraid, you can manipulate them very easily. You can restrict them for their own good, etc., etc. This is what partly happened during the pandemic, but also in other contexts.
But if I just, sorry, may interrupt you, but if I may just say that the antidote to this permanent crisis is to narrate, I think you said something of the same, to tell stories.
Yes, but at the same time, as you said, this blip is actually described as a story, the blip on Instagram and so on. So I think what we could also talk about is about the battering that language took. Even the word resilience has been really turned around and used against us. So yeah, let's talk about that as well. And I really would like to stick to, yes, narrate, we can narrate, but if you're a novelist, you have to be published to be able to convey your story, to have it read. And you have to have time to write it. You need some kind of support to be able to do that, and so on. And again, I'm referring to Paul Lynch because I have to say I agreed with a lot of what he said. And he mentioned the Irish Arts Council, the Arts Council of Ireland, which really has this very strong, lasting policy of supporting artists. And this is something that has fallen away in many countries, including the UK, which is where I live. So anyway, let's go back to Greece, and what were the possible solutions you found as artists, as writers?
Well, first of all, politically, I couldn't agree more with what Christian said. So, nevertheless, we are alive now. and we have to live. We cannot merely survive. Unfortunately, we live in times where they're pushing us, and when I say us, I mean general population, to a state of mere survival. And, you know, the answer, not the answer, but the answer to that is that people need more in order to live. They need bread, but they need words too. And perhaps this is, you know, what we did and what we do. It's a kind of persistence to despite, not because of the crisis, which is a permanent situation, that despite the crisis, we continue to, you know, to believe in the uniqueness of each thing, organic and inorganic, the sense of each one being a unique subject, and that's how sacred or valuable it is. And I think that art and poetry, fiction, writing creates an alternative narrative for this world. This alternative narrative that goes through the language as a tool, it's still here, it does exist, and it is quite important to have this alternative narrative of the world that says that if we surrender to the narrative that wants to diminish each one of us in a series of calculations and numbers, then we will face again the abyss, and it is very dangerous. So I do believe that this. So coming to more pragmatic things about my experience during the crisis and until now in Greece, which is a country that is historically arts are completely underfunded, or even, you know, dealt with contempt by the state. What happens is, and again, I'm not saying this to make things look beautiful or romanticize, but my experience about Greek art scene is that people create collectives, create networks, because that's the way they unite with each other, because that's the way they can exist. So what I have seen in my experience is the creation of sort of autonomous artistic groups, poets, collectives. I am part of a collective of poets which has created and publishes a magazine on poetry and theory. It's a magazine that has to do exactly, want to put these two narratives of the world together. So social science, but also literature, and the way these two can coexist and communicate with each other. And this culture of overcoming the obstacles, of doing it despite the difficulties, I think that has kept the artistic scene in Greece really thriving and being very authentic. This is a side, it's another conversation about artistic freedom, because when everything is curated or too much, you know, where there's too much curation, commission, funding, you have to be a good employee. You lose your freedom a little bit. So, you know, it's an equilibrium between the two. There is some space for thought there.
The same? Okay. Well, about logistics first. One should know what it means to be a Greek artist today, which is very different from being a European artist. And although we belong to Europe, everything is different. So in Greece, we don't have literary agents. We don't have translation funds. Belonging to a very small linguistic community anyway, the only way to go out into the world would be through translation. We don't have that. Even when publishers are interested in publishing a Greek writer, they can't do it because, as I see in many different European countries, you get these funds to continue or to start with a translation at least. So, what is basic in Europe is not basic for us. So, we have to fight even for this. And I can see it when I am with colleagues of mine, my age, my generation, in a festival. And we've done the same things. We belong to the same generation. We've written same kind of books. I know they work, and they don't know mine. And how could they, if there's not a translation involved? So this puts you already in another place in the discussion, in the art scene. Put the crisis on it, and it becomes worse. On the other hand, what Katerina has said about the artistic freedom, this is very important also. We can be free to create, but who is going to read what we create? Who is going to find out what we create? So we create in a void. It's interesting. I can't say it's not interesting. And it's kind of romantic. But artists also have a stomach and a family. And it's a work, it's a profession. And we don't have the ethics of a profession in Greece. I remember a taxi driver once asked me, "What's your job?" And I said, "I'm a writer." "Yes, but what do you do for your living?" And he was right. I teach creative writing. This is, I put all my energy to create new writers, and it's great. But I take all this energy and time from my work. Collectives is a great thing. And Katerina is right. It all developed through the crisis, during the crisis. Dimitris, who is not here with us today, Tsumplekas, he was a part of a collective, Depression era. Architects, writers, intellectuals, photographers, they worked together during the crisis. The thing for me is what happened afterwards. We lived through this. And now we have our experiences, and we probably are going to write also about it at a certain point. But I remember vividly publishers and agents asking me during the crisis, "Have you written something about the crisis?" Like I was a kind of journalist and I had to respond immediately. So Greece, for 2 or 3 years, became a fashion again, like it was during the dictatorship in the 60s. So then we had Melina Mercouri, we had Theodorakis, we had all the people who left Greece to go to France, and through them, Greece was known to Europe and to the world. And now the new crisis is like it gave an opportunity, as every time a problem, a big crisis, makes us care about the others. We're all interested in what Ukraine is doing now, of course. But Ukrainian writers cannot write during the war. They will start, if they are good writers, to write afterwards. Isn't it how it all happens? I remember a writer who had, she's dead now, Alkizei. She lived through the dictatorship and the Second World War. Yes, she already. And she said this, that you cannot write when the bombs are falling. You have to wait and to understand what the bomb created in you. And she's so right. We have to wait. Palestinian poets are invited everywhere, and it's the right thing to do. But I think the best poems will come after the real end of the war. Not to say the end of the trauma, if there is such a thing.
Christian, could you briefly maybe talk about your experience in Argentina? Because that's supposed to be another example of actually a kind of weird flourishing of the arts. I know in publishing and writing, it was supposed to be like that after the crisis or as a result of the crisis.
No, I'd love to do that, but I just want to briefly touch on what my co-speakers have said. You know, coming from Switzerland, which it's sort of, we don't really have these hiccups or crises, bless you, but you know, I think this is probably very well known that it's sort of this island of greed and you know, in some way like a pimple on the face of Europe. But on the other side, because Swiss people tend to think of their society as a perfect society, because it is neutral, we don't go to war, you know, we have the Red Cross and all these nice things and good cheese and the problem is then that there is no contemporary culture of note coming out of Switzerland. We're a nation of 7 million people, and you know, I think I'm one of 5 writers or maybe 5 or 6 in contemporary Switzerland. And if you compare it to countries like Sweden, the same amount of people, 7 million people, you know, a wonderful film industry, you know, wonderful literature, pop music, everything, you know, Greece, of course, a much larger country than Switzerland, but just a prodigious output of wonderful things and film directors, as you mentioned, and we have nothing because we're in some way so, you know, so pleased with the contrat social, you know, that the Swiss have decided that their way of, you know, their moral standing, which is now changing a little bit with Russia and so forth, but you know, to sort of stay out of everything, not to get involved, just take everyone's money and hide it. But we have, you know, we have great health care. We accept a lot of immigrants, and you know, so I think in a way Switzerland is something of an outlier in this because we have no crisis. We have nothing, you know, to fight against in some way because it's already all perfect, and. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about Switzerland that way. And I had another thought, if I may. It's very short. Just because I used to be a great admirer of Yorgos Lanthimos, who made some of the most fantastic films like Dogtooth and The Lobster. And I think this, but you know, as soon as the crisis was over, he's now made 2 terrible films. Poor Things, I had to walk out of it. I was shocked. It was really horrible. And so I think there's some way this is maybe things that germinate in a crisis are also good in a way. And then when everyone is saturated like the Swiss, you know, you get hundreds of millions of dollars or Swiss francs to do your thing. It just kind of peters out into bad art in a way. What do you think?
Well supported bad art.
I hated good films as well.
Sorry?
I hated good films.
We say that we hated the films also, so.
But I love
You have to speak into the microphone. Speak into the microphone because it's being recorded.
Yes, no, I agree. But I don't know if it was because of the crisis or because what he had to say has already was round up and finished. So, you know, we make this conclusion, but sometimes it's very personal, right?
But if you create a film and put it out there, it's no longer personal. I think Poor Things was so misogynist and just a terrible movie. And I don't know what happened, so I'm just putting it down to.
I'm with you. I agree completely.
So let's leave Argentina out of it. Let's focus on Europe. Thank you for all the comments on Switzerland and on suggesting that adversity maybe does generate interesting art. Katerina.
Yes, it's very interesting what Christian said, and I was thinking about that. I wanted to comment a little bit about that. That, you know, people generally want to believe in something. So when they are united against something that is very visibly oppressive, usually great art is produced by this resistance. And it's not political art, not necessarily political art, but it's meaningful art. So I have read, for example, Milan Kundera, the Czech, very beloved novelist, and other people that lived through the through the communist era, that were saying that, you know, the energy of art creativity was incredible, and you would risk your life to write a poem. So when so much is at stake, something is going on. The problem now is that we live in a very different time, and the tyranny is internalized, unfortunately. It's not out there, it's not somewhere. We cannot really grasp what is there. It's the worst thing that happens is that the mechanisms are very, very subtle, and they're very refined. And the mechanisms of totalitarianism and tyranny are embodied inside us. It's really satanic. And so we tend to support the same systems that oppress us, like the institutes many times, and it's, the speed in which meta-capitalistic world absorbs any kind of, opposing argument, narrative, film is so fast. One example is that, I don't know if you remember the movement Occupy New York that happened a few years ago because of the economic crisis. Well, 2 years afterwards, Occupy, the movement, was a work of art in the Berlin Biennale. So, it's difficult. You have to be very, very clever. I don't know,
Yeah. So you're saying it was co-opted, basically. Yeah. I think at this point, if I may, I'd like to open it up to the audience, to the floor. Are there any questions? I have noticed that in other sessions, it has happened that the speakers could not understand the question, and they had to ask the moderator, who is almost in all the sessions a local person, to translate it. I probably won't be able to do that, but let's see how we go, and maybe there's someone who can, if we can't hear you properly. Do we have a roving mic, first of all? Do we have a microphone for the audience? Yes?
Yeah, I think you guys touched on it a little bit, especially you, Katerina, especially about times of crisis creating revolutionary art in itself. So is it because I am sort of away from Greece that I don't feel that kind of movement coming up, or is it that there is complacency in artists itself to sort of like, okay, let me just get through this, and not to sort of question, or if not overthrow the system itself through the crisis?
No, there was a lot of questioning. I mean, there was absolutely with any medium of art was questioning. The crisis itself, but the general crisis in as a society, as a kind of even existential field. So there was very much that. I think that what Amanda said is that when there is a claim from media, from other entities, where there is a claim that art should do this, that, or the other, or should find answers. It's not art's job to do that, because art is asking questions. They cannot find the answers, and this is not what art does. That's what I think Amanda said. But there was a lot of questioning and resisting through art.
I'm Ulrike from Germany, and I'm an agent. And the question that came up when I listened to you is that do you also have this feeling in Greece that part of the crisis is that publishers, agents, editors, everyone is quite traditional in their ways, making decisions based on that? Because I see in comparison to that, like Switzerland, there are small countries in Europe that are under big pressure, have about print runs of 500 to 1,000 copies, but they are incredibly successful because they are closer to the market and they make use of fundings outside of institutions, for example, by the European Union. And my idea of the German market is we're a bit behind because we are driven by traditional decision-making based on readers that are not the same like 20 years ago. Do you have the same feeling about Greece?
The problem is we can't hear very well. There is a kind of echo. But if I understood well the question, you mean why Greece is not in the market more energetic or doesn't take advance of the funds, etc.?
I would say the crisis that we're talking about is not the reality in every country in Europe, because we're very close to each other, we can easily be compared. But I have a feeling that the crisis is based on the industry. In Germany, we are a little bit back in time, very traditional decision making, while other countries like Slovenia, for example, or the Baltic countries are ways in front of us. That are the publishers who sell rights all over the world, not only Europe. And in Germany, we are really missing out. Is that the same?
Yeah, you are very right. I think it has to do also with the Greek idiosyncrasy. For instance, Greek publishers, when they go to the big book fairs, they go primarily to buy and not to sell. So if you start with this kind of security, of course this will affect also the industry. If you have more translation than original works in the language, of course this means something. For instance, I can compare this to the US, who has 3% of translated work. Everything is Anglophone or American. And there is this famous little university magazine, 3%. This is how I remember, because it's dedicated to translation from other countries. Yes, this is a national problem also, that we always feel that the others are better and that we have to buy from them and not sell. It's not only about literature or visual arts, or it's, I guess, in very different fields. For me, the thing is, how can we change that? And I don't have an answer to this. Every time I see how my fellow friends in Germany or in France, or they have all these opportunities to go through the Alliance Française or through the DAD to Japan, let's say, for 6 months, or they have to write something, a project that relates to a country, and they can't do that. They get money and they travel. For me, it's like another world. We don't have the basics. So we have a long road ahead of us.
But I think what you're referring to is also something that actually was, in my view, the result of the crisis partly. And you're talking about how the industry, how the publishing industry works. Well, there were lots of mergers. I mean, publishing in Europe now belongs to only several large publishing conglomerates, and they may have imprints, so you're not immediately aware of it. And perhaps the smaller countries are not really so interesting for them to take over. So you have much more happening there that's kind of independent, because the publishing consists, the sector consists of small independent publishing houses. But to what extent they're independent is another question, because they depend on state funding, both from home and from abroad.
I can give an example, because we speak of Germany. When I had a book translated in the US, God's Wife, Daniel Kellman, one of your great writers, contemporary writers, wrote a wonderful thing about my book. And this is how the book was sold back to Europe, to different countries in Europe, through these kind writers from different countries who wrote about my book. And I compare this sometimes to avocados. They are produced in Chile, and then you go to Greece and you have avocados from Chile. This is not ecological. You have to find a way to talk about your art also. So this is where the collectives come, and this kind of helping each other would be helpful. If Greek writers could also write and help other Greek writers, I think this could be a first step.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions, requiring an answer that may not be very long. Any more questions from the audience? No? Yes? Answer. There is one.
My question is a very general one, a curious Malayali question. How do you like this format of literature festival? And in the current topic, what we are talking about, the crisis in the art industry in Greek, what do you think Kerala Literature Festival, where you were maybe there for last 3 days, what do you think about this format? And is it a solution, or is it a way forward for any publishing industry, especially for literature and art? What is your take on KLF? How did you enjoy it, at least?
Well, thank you. What a lovely way to conclude this, because our impression of Kerala and the festival is, I think, the best. I mean it. We are completely moved from from the reception, from the people, from the way we talk to people all the time, especially people from Kerala, in different ways, people that are co-writers, but also members of the public. And what we were commenting earlier is how alive this is. That is a festival that is addressed to readers, is addressed to people who read books. It's not a festival that is like among a group of writers. And this is a very, very important thing, and we take this It's really, really important and essential. So thank you so much for being here.
Can I add something? I was talking today to my colleagues. I was showing them some letters, some emails that I received during the festival from Indian young people who probably found me through my site and were talking about my books in very emotional ways. I was very moved. One of them wrote, I want I want to learn Greek so that I can read your other works. It's things you don't hear anymore, so direct. So this communication of the reader and the writer in such a personal level, it was great. But also, it's not only about reading or writing, it's about life. We just come back from a wonderful cruise at the backwaters, and our experience there was out of the world. The taxi driver, the discussion we had, the tour guide, it was wonderful. And then we had lunch, we had fried fish at a family there. And it was like everything was wrapped up in the most ideal way. So we feel also we would like to learn the language, I would say also, that we can communicate directly.
But to get back to your question about the format, I assume that you're talking about the format of the festival. And this is not my first time here. I've been to Kerala quite a few times, and I have to say that the reception here is amazing. People are warm. They are genuinely interested. They ask interesting questions. They really think about what they hear. It's moving, but it's also very encouraging. And yeah, I'd like to, and I'm glad that both Amanda and Katerina has this experience. Christian, would you like to say something nice about Kerala?
Certainly. I would like to say, in the words of my Slovenian friends, art is fanaticism that demands diplomacy. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.